Colossal Question.
Is wrestling fake? Okay guys, let's go beyond the mat and expose pro wrestling once and for all. It's staged. You see, pro wrestlers are just as much actors as they are athletes. They go into matches knowing who's gonna win and what big moves they'll use to end the fight. The wrestlers in the ring might do a good job of making it seem like they can't stand each other, but it actually takes tons of coordination and cooperation for wrestling to look real, so competing wrestlers have to work together. During the match, wrestlers whisper about the next move so they can both make it look as realistic and painful as possible without actually hurting each other. And for the biggest moves, like a choke slam, it's usually the person taking the move that puts in all the work, jumping into the air and letting themselves come crashing back down to make it look like their opponent has almost superhuman strength. In that way, they're kind of like a pair of figure skaters, just with a few more flying kicks to the face. So, pro wrestling definitely isn't a sport, but does that mean it's fake? Well, no, not really. Unlike in movies, there are no body doubles, CGI, wires, or crash pads used to fake the stunts. So while the setup is all make-believe, the cuts, bumps, and bruises you see in the match are all real. That's why pro wrestlers get injured so often and why they tell you to never try this at home. Just leave it to the professionals. Is it called soccer or football? Since the sport first started in England, where it's called football, most people assume that soccer must be an American word, but it's not. Turns out, it comes from British slang. Even still, most British fans today reject the name soccer and insist on football. Meanwhile, very few Americans call the sport football. Technically speaking, everybody's right. Both words are correct. You see, it all goes back to 1863, the year that the English Football Association officially wrote down a set of rules for the sport. At the time, the sport was super popular in England, but it wasn't the only type of football people played. Rugby football was another version that let players touch the ball and carry it around. So, one of the sports became known as association football, while the other was called rugby football. Eventually, people just started calling it rugby or rugger. Association football became known as just football, but it also sometimes got called a soc or a soak, a soccer, and then eventually soccer. For a while, the name soccer was used alongside football in England, and no one seemed to care which word you used. It all meant the same thing. But by the 1980s, people more or less stopped saying soccer entirely across Britain, and the ever-popular sport became known just as football. Meanwhile, across the pond in the US, another sport was growing more and more popular all throughout the 20th century: gridiron football. This version borrowed bits from both rugby and association football, mashing them up into a new variation. This new version of American gridiron football proved to be quite popular in the US, and people quickly started referring to the sport as football across the country. Because of this, association football players across the US started using the old slang term soccer to differentiate from American football, and by the middle of the 20th century, the term soccer was firmly cemented in place. There are other countries that call it soccer too. Like the US, it's usually because there's another variation of football that's popular in the country, creating a need for different names. Canada calls it soccer because they play their own version of gridiron football. Ireland calls it both words since they also have Gaelic football. In Australia, they have a form of rugby called Aussie rules football, so they call the other sport soccer. New Zealand, South Africa, Japan, and a few others use the word too. So which is it, soccer or football? Well, it depends on where you live, but no matter what you say, you're talking about the same sport. So call it whatever you want. Just don't touch the ball with your hands. Is cheerleading a real sport? No matter what you think of cheerleading, one thing's for sure. It takes just as much physical skill and training as any other sport. But is that enough to make it an official sport? The legal definition of a sport has been narrowed down to 5 key factors. It must be a physical activity, there must be some sort of competition with a winner, there needs to be a set of rules, and the purpose of the competition must be to compare skills. So far, cheerleading's 4 for 4. But the fifth key factor is where things get tricky. The primary purpose of the activity must be competition. Since cheerleading's main purpose is to support other athletic teams, competition comes second. So by that definition, cheerleading might not be a sport. So what's the big deal? Does it really matter if cheerleading is called a sport? Yes, it does. Since it isn't currently considered a sport, cheerleading doesn't have the same rules to keep athletes safe. At many high schools and colleges, cheer squads don't get the same quality equipment, uniforms, or practice space as other sports. Cheerleading is the cause of about 2/3 of all catastrophic injuries for high school female athletes. Among all sports, cheerleading has the second most injuries after football. If cheerleading was recognized as a sport, stricter rules and regulations could reduce the number of injuries and give cheer coaches access to better equipment. So in other words, it really matters what gets considered a sport. The good news is that according to the American Medical Association, cheerleading definitely should be considered a sport. For the AMA, it's because of all the injury risks involved. The International Olympic Committee took things one step further and has actually begun the process of naming cheerleading as an official Olympic sport. So, to all the cheerleaders out there, if you want to help get cheering recognized as a legal sport, get cheering, get stunting, and go! Fight! Win! Fight! Win! Yeah! Who invented the dab? Let's start with the super basics. The dab, or dabbing, is a dance move you've probably seen where somebody drops their head into the crook of their bent arm while raising their other arm. Most of the time, the dance move is used to show off, like after doing something particularly cool. So that's the move, but where did it actually come from? Well, in order to track the origins of the dab, you have to go back to the early 2010s in Atlanta. A rapper by the name of Skippa da Flippa has been credited with inventing the viral move, but it wasn't until 2015 that the dance really took off. That year, the move started to go viral on the internet, and it wasn't long before it caught fire. During a game on November 15th, Carolina Panthers quarterback dabbed in the face of his opponent after scoring a touchdown in an NFL game. The Atlanta rappers who invented the move loved it and even called Cam Newton the Dab Daddy. From there, it was off to the races. Kids, celebrities, TV personalities, politicians, and then everyone's dad all jumped at the chance to try out the cool new dance. And before long, grown-ups did what they do best: take something fun and turn it into something lame. So that's the story of the dab. Created by Atlanta rapper, popularized by an NFL quarterback, memified by the internet, and ruined by dads everywhere. So the next question is, who's gonna kill it? If we all work together, I think we can make it happen. Nah, just kidding. It's never going away. What was the first sport? Before we can go back and determine which sport was the very first, we have to define what a sport actually is. According to the dictionary, a sport is any athletic activity that requires strategy, skill, and/or physical expertise, where an individual or team competes against another for entertainment. That means some age-old activities like hunting aren't considered a sport, especially in the ancient days of hunting and gathering, where it was more a matter of survival. So if we really think about a sport as an organized, competitive game designed to entertain, then there is one ancient sport that just might be the oldest: wrestling. That's right! A sport you can still find in the Olympic Games to this very day is also likely the oldest sport ever invented. In fact, the oldest cave paintings in the world include almost 15,000-year-old paintings of people wrestling. Across the globe in modern-day Mongolia, there's also 9,000-year-old cave paintings that clearly show a wrestling match in action while a crowd of people watch. Art from ancient Egypt and Babylon also show detailed depictions of wrestlers doing moves and holds still used today. And prehistoric paintings in Japan portray sumo wrestlers. Wrestling is found in ancient Indian texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Homer's The Iliad, and all sorts of other important ancient texts. So, safe to say that wrestling was a widespread sport since before recorded history and has remained popular around the globe ever since. Okay, so wrestling just might be the very first sport ever, but why were sports invented in the first place? What's the point? And why does just about every culture in history play them? Well, we can't definitively say for sure, but most experts believe that sports originated as a way to stay prepared to hunt or enter military service. That might explain why so many of the oldest sports include running, swimming, throwing spears or rocks, shooting bows, and, of course, one-on-one contests like wrestling or boxing. All of these made for exciting sporting events, but maybe more importantly, they kept the athletes fit and ready for anything the ancient world had to offer. So next time you're wrestling with your older brother and he's got you in a headlock, at least you can take solace in the fact that you're taking part in an age-old tradition. Who invented soccer? It might seem like soccer has been around forever, but it's actually a relatively young sport in human history. People have been playing sports for a long time. Even the Olympic Games are well over 2,000 years old. But soccer as we know it today has only really existed since the 1800s. It's certainly true that people have been playing ball games for thousands of years, like the ancient Chinese game of Kuju, or the Japanese variation called Kamari, which was kind of like a soccer meets hacky sack. There's also the Roman game of harpastum, which was a bit like a rough and tumble version of rugby, as well as tons of variations on ball games played by different cultures all around the world. During the Middle Ages, folk football took form, which was a forerunner to modern-day soccer and became a popular pastime across England and other parts of Europe. But back then, the game was still a bit of a DIY kind of thing. So each village and town would come up with their own version of the rules, with some being decidedly more violent than others. As you might imagine, all the local variations made it hard for students from different schools to play together once they reached university, since they all grew up playing with slightly different rules. Not ideal. Clearly, soccer needed clear rules that everyone agreed on, and in 1863, that finally happened. That's the year that a collection of 12 soccer clubs around the London area banded together to form the Football Association and agreed on a set of rules that were printed and passed out. These new regulations officially made it against the rules to touch the ball with your hands, except for goalkeepers. This differentiated soccer from rugby once and for all, and allowed anyone anywhere to play the game with the same rules. Now, all anyone needed was a rulebook, a ball, a field, and some nets, and they could play soccer. It wasn't long before the game spread across England, all across the world, and became the planet's most popular sport. And you can drop that bit of knowledge on your friends next time you're playing. Probably on a TV.